I was in the twilight of my life when I lost everything in a devastating flood. My own daughter closed her doors to me when I needed her most. Desperate, I called my childhood sweetheart, a man I had not seen in 45 years. When he opened the door and said, "Welcome home," I realized that sometimes we have to lose everything to find what really matters. But before we continue, make sure you are subscribed to the channel and write in the comments where you are watching us from. We love to know how far our stories reach. My name is Emily, and at 63 years old, I thought I had already experienced all the forms of pain that life could offer. I was wrong. The flood alarm sounded on an ordinary Wednesday at 10:45 in the morning. I was in the kitchen where I raised my only daughter, Sarah, preparing my morning coffee while listening to the news on the radio. The weatherman had mentioned the possibility of heavy rains, but in our Riverside neighborhood, that was routine. We had faced many storms over the years. I should have paid more attention to the warnings. The sky darkened faster than I had ever seen. In minutes, it took on a threatening greenish-gray tone that churned my stomach with fear. I turned on the emergency radio and heard the words that would change everything. Severe flood warning. The river is overflowing rapidly toward the Riverside district, my neighborhood. I had maybe 15 minutes to save what I could. My hands shook as I stuffed photo albums, important documents, and some jewelry into a small suitcase. 40 years of memories, and I could only save what fit in that suitcase. The wedding photo with Robert, the baby photos of Sarah, my mother's pearl necklace. Everything else would have to stay. The rain hit the windows with growing fury as I went up to the attic, the only place that might remain dry. The steps creaked under my feet, protesting against the weight of my desperate escape. I huddled in the dark corner, hugging the suitcase against my chest, listening to what sounded like a runaway train destroying my world down there. The house groaned and creaked, fighting against forces much larger than the sturdy structure Robert was so proud of when we bought it in 1988. Then came the silence. That empty and terrible silence that means everything you knew no longer exists. When I finally went down those attic steps, my legs could barely support me. Where my living room used to be, there was only sky. Open sky and debris scattered like confetti after a cruel celebration. The kitchen table where Sarah used to do her homework was embedded in what remained of the garage wall. My violet garden, which I cultivated for 18 years, looked like it had gone through a blender. I stood there amidst the ruins of my life, still holding the soaked suitcase, and cried for the first time since Robert's funeral 6 years ago. The neighbors, who were lucky enough to still have houses, took me in the first night. Sweet Mrs. Linda next door insisted I stay with her, but her house was also damaged and she had her own relatives to worry about. Civil Defense set up temporary shelters, but the idea of sleeping in a gym full of strangers made me feel even more lost than I already was. It was then that I knew I had to call Sarah. My daughter lives about an hour away in Chicago, in a tree-lined gated community with houses that look like they were taken from decor magazines. She moved there 3 years ago when she was promoted to regional manager at the tech company where she works. We were not as close as mother and daughter should be, but she was the only family I had left. I used Mrs. Linda's phone because mine was somewhere under what was once my bedroom. My hands shook as I dialed her number, a number I had memorized but rarely used except for birthdays or Christmas. Sarah, honey, it is Mom. Is. My voice sounded more fragile than I intended. The conversation was short and practical. I explained about the flood, about the house, about my need for a place to stay temporarily. There was a long pause before she accepted. The relief I felt was so intense I almost fainted. My daughter would take care of me. Despite all our distance, all the unanswered calls and awkward holiday scenes, she was still my little girl. The insurance adjuster appeared the next morning, a young man with deep dark circles who looked like he would rather be anywhere else. He walked through what remained of my house with a clipboard and a camera, taking occasional notes. "Total loss," he said casually, as if those 2 words did not represent my entire existence. "How much?" I asked, fearing the answer. "With your policy discounting the deductible and depreciation we are talking about, approximately $180,000. $180,000 to rebuild 40 years of life. It seemed impossible. Mrs. Linda helped me pack the little I could save into her car. 3 plastic bags with clothes that smelled of mud and disaster, a suitcase with photos and documents, and Robert's toolbox that somehow survived in the garage. It was all that remained of the life I had built. The trip to Sarah's house felt like a trip to a foreign country. Everything looked different when you have nowhere to return to. The familiar landmarks, the gas station where I always bought my lottery tickets, the bakery where Robert and I used to drink coffee on Sundays, they all seemed to belong to someone else's life now. Sarah's neighborhood had not been touched by the flood. Perfect lawns, spotless sidewalks, perfect lives continuing exactly as they were the day before. I felt like an intruder bringing my disaster into their immaculate world. Her house was a modern 2-story construction with large windows and a dark wood door that Peter, her boyfriend, had chosen. I had met him exactly twice in the 18 months they had been together. He was 38 and she was 39. He worked at some investment firm downtown and had opinions on everything from coffee brands to international politics. I parked Mrs. Linda's car in their driveway and sat for a moment gathering courage. This is temporary, I told myself, just until I figure out the next step, just until the insurance money arrives and I can find a small apartment somewhere. I never imagined that walking to my daughter's front door carrying my 3 bags of belongings would be one of the hardest things I have ever done. But when I raised my hand to knock, I felt a familiar sensation. The same emptiness I felt when Robert died, as if the ground were disappearing beneath my feet, only I did not yet know how much further I was about to fall. Sarah opened the door before I could knock, as if she had been watching me through the window. For a brief moment, seeing her familiar face, Robert's eyes, my stubborn chin, made me feel that everything might be okay. She was my daughter, my only child. Surely blood meant something. Mom. She stepped aside to let me in, but her voice held something I could not identify. Distance, perhaps, or discomfort. Peter appeared right behind her as if he had been waiting in the wings. He wore dress pants and a shirt that probably cost more than I used to spend on groceries in a month. His hair was impeccably styled, and his smile was the kind that never reached the eyes. "Emily, how terrible about your house," he said, looking at my bags. Not at me. Sarah told me what happened. I left my bags on the floor of her immaculate entryway, suddenly aware of how I must look. My clothes still had the smell of disaster, wet wood, mud, and something else I could not name. Destruction, perhaps. Loss. "It is just temporary," I said quickly, "just until I can get back on my feet." Sarah and Peter exchanged a look, one of those silent conversations couples have, the kind that excludes everyone else in the room. I had seen Robert and me do the same countless times, but from the other side it felt like I was being excluded from a club I did not know existed. "Let us sit and talk," Sarah said, leading me to the living room. Her house was beautiful, in the way magazine houses are beautiful. Everything matched. Nothing was out of place. Minimalist furniture that looked like no one had ever sat on it. Glass coffee tables reflecting light from windows so clean they seemed invisible. It was the kind of house that made you afraid to touch anything. I sat on the edge of her white sofa with my muddy shoes firmly planted on her spotless wooden floor. Peter noticed and made a slight grimace. "So what is the plan?" Sarah asked, sitting in the chair across from me. Not next to me on the sofa where she could have put an arm around her grieving mother, but across from me, as if we were conducting a business meeting. "Well, the insurance adjuster said it will take a few weeks to process everything, maybe a month. I hoped I could stay here until then, just until I find a small apartment or something." The silence that followed lasted a few seconds longer than it should have. I saw Peter's face change. I saw his jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. He leaned in and put a hand on Sarah's arm, a gesture that looked supportive but felt possessive. "Mom," Sarah began, and I knew from her tone that what came next would break my heart. "The thing is, Peter and I have been talking, and we really value our privacy here. We work long hours, and this is our sanctuary. Do you understand? I blinked, uncomprehending. I would not get in your way. I would be quiet. I would help cook and clean. I would not cause any problems. Peter leaned forward with his voice soft but firm. It is not about problems, Emily. It is about space. This is our first home together, and we are still finding our rhythm as a couple. I am her mother, I said, the words coming out sharper than I intended. Of course you are, Peter replied calmly, and that is exactly why we think you would feel more comfortable somewhere else, somewhere where you can have your independence while you rebuild. I looked at Sarah, expecting her to contradict him, to remember that I was the woman who had stayed up with her during all the fevers, that I had worked overtime to pay for her college books, that I had held her hand during her divorce 2 years ago when her ex-husband left her for his assistant. Instead, she nodded. Peter is right, Mom. We think you would be happier with your own space. The words hit me like a physical punch. I actually felt my chest tighten as if someone were squeezing my lungs. Happier, Sarah? I lost everything yesterday. Everything. And you think I would be happier alone in a hotel room than here with my family? It does not have to be a hotel, Peter said quickly. There are some very nice apartments near the mall. Very clean, very safe, and they have small kitchens, so you can cook for yourself. I stared at him. This man who had been in my daughter's life for 18 months telling me where I should live after losing my home. And how exactly do you suggest I pay for this wonderful apartment? The insurance money will not arrive for weeks. Sarah shifted uncomfortably. I could help with that. A few hundred to get you started. A few hundred. As if I were a distant acquaintance she barely knew, not the woman who gave her life. Sarah, I said, my voice barely a whisper, I rocked you every night when you were a baby. I walked the hall with you when you had nightmares. I taught you to ride a bike and helped you with your homework. And I held you when you cried because Jason broke your heart in 8th grade. Her face twitched slightly, but Peter squeezed her arm tighter. No one is questioning your history, he said. We just think everyone would be more comfortable with some boundaries. Boundaries? I had heard that word from the therapist Sarah had seen after her divorce. Everything was about boundaries. You are kicking me out, I said bluntly. We are not kicking you out, Sarah protested. We are just saying that maybe this arrangement would not work for anyone. Whose idea was this? I asked, although I already knew the answer. I could tell by the way Peter sat back a little satisfied, as if he had won something. We discussed it together, Sarah said, but she would not look me in the eye. I stood up slowly, my knees protesting in a way that reminded me I was 63 and alone in the world. I understand. Mom, do not be like that. We are trying to do what is best for everyone. Best for everyone? I repeated the words as if they were in a foreign language. What would be best for everyone, Sarah, is if your mother did not have to sleep in her car tonight? Peter's perfectly made-up face arranged itself into an expression of concern. You do not have to sleep in your car. Like I said, there are options. I looked around her immaculate living room one last time, at the photos that included Sarah and Peter, but none of me. At the expensive furniture no one was allowed to really use, at my daughter, who had chosen this cold, elegant man over her own mother. You are right, I said finally. There are always options. I took my 3 bags and Robert's toolbox. The weight of them felt heavier now that I knew I was not welcome. Sarah stood up looking uncomfortable, but not uncomfortable enough to change her mind. I will call you in a few days, she said, once you get settled somewhere. Do not bother, I said, surprised by the firmness in my voice. I would not want to intrude on your sanctuary. Peter had the decency to look a little ashamed, but not enough to speak. Not enough to say, wait, this is wrong. She is your mother. I walked out of that perfect house with her perfect partner and their perfect boundaries and sat in Mrs. Linda's borrowed car for a long time before I could force myself to start the engine. Through their front window, I could see Sarah and Peter talking, Probably about how difficult I was being, how much drama I was bringing into their quiet lives. The irony was not lost on me. I had spent years after Robert died telling myself I was strong and independent, that I did not need anyone. Now, when I really needed help, I discovered that independence is a luxury you can only afford when you have options. I drove to a supermarket parking lot and sat there as the sun went down, trying to figure out where a 63-year-old woman with $150 in her purse and 3 bags of flood-damaged belongings should sleep. The car was getting cold, and I had maybe an hour before the security guard noticed me and asked me to leave. That was when I remembered the business card I had kept in my wallet for nearly 45 years, yellowed with age and soft from being handled so much. A card I never thought I would actually use from a boy I loved when the world was young and anything seemed possible. Anthony Miller. The boy who had promised to come back for me one day before life got in the way, and he simply never arrived. I took out my phone and looked at the faded numbers on the card, wondering if they still worked, wondering if he was even alive, wondering if I had the courage to find out. I spent 2 nights sleeping in that borrowed car before I found the courage to make the call. 2 nights waking up with body aches and the taste of humiliation in my mouth. 2 nights moving from parking lot to parking lot so security would not notice the old woman living in her vehicle. 2 nights using gas station bathrooms to wash my face and brush my teeth, avoiding eye contact with my reflection because I could not bear what I saw there. The business card felt like tissue paper between my fingers, worn by 4 decades of being carried but never used. Anthony Miller, it read in faded blue ink, below a phone number with an area code I did not recognize. On the back, in my own youthful handwriting, I will always remember you, E. I had written those words when I was 18, believing with the absolute certainty of youth that Anthony Miller would be the great love of my life. He was 20, with dark hair that fell over his eyes and a smile that lit up any room. He worked at the downtown bookstore after school and dreamed of bigger things, of building something that mattered. We dated for 10 months, which at 18 felt like an eternity. He used to take me to the lookout on the hills outside of town, where we would sit in his old car and talk about our plans. He was going to start his own business, he said. Something with books, maybe? Or education? Something that would change the world and give us the life we deserved. I will come back for you, Emily, he promised the night before he left for college in New York. I will become someone, and then I will come back and marry you. But promises at 18 have a way of fading when real life takes over. At first, he wrote me letters long and passionate, full of dreams and plans. I replied telling him about my business course, about my job at the library, about how I was waiting for him exactly as promised. Then the letters became shorter, less frequent. When I met Robert 9 months later at a graduation party, Anthony felt like a beautiful dream I had once had, too good to be real. Robert was stable, reliable, already 27, with a good job at the engineering firm. He did not promise me the world, but he promised me a home, a family, security. When he proposed to me after 6 months of dating, I said yes. I kept Anthony's business card in my bridal jewelry drawer, a secret talisman I just could not throw away. Now, 45 years later, sitting in a car that was not mine in a supermarket parking lot, I wondered what happened to that dreamy boy with the radiant smile. I followed him discreetly over the years the way you do with first loves. Through friends in common, I had heard that he had kept his promises, started a chain of bookstores that grew into something major. He never married, which surprised people. Too busy building his empire, they said. That Miller boy was always an idealist. The last I heard, maybe 8 years ago, his company had expanded beyond the state, reaching New York and Los Angeles. Miller Cultural Bookstores with cafes, event spaces, and educational programs. The local bookstore boy had become the kind of man who appeared in business magazines and gave lectures on literature and education. What would this man want with a 63-year-old widow sleeping in a borrowed car? The rational part of my brain told me it was ridiculous, even pathetic. You do not call someone after 45 years because your life has fallen apart. You do not look for your teenage boyfriend when you are old and desperate and have nowhere else to go. But rational thought is a luxury when you are counting coins in your purse and trying to figure out if you have enough for a coffee in a bathroom with a lock. The third morning, I could not take it anymore. My back hurt from sleeping curled up in the front seat. My clothes smelled like the inside of a car, and I had spent the last of my money on a gas station sandwich that tasted like cardboard and despair. I sat in the parking lot of a coffee shop looking at the card, my hands shaking from more than just the morning chill. What would I say? "Hi, Anthony, do you remember me? I am homeless now. Can you help me?" The number on the card was probably disconnected, or I would call some secretary who would kindly inform me that Mr. Miller was too important to take calls from random women claiming to know him from high school. But what if it was not like that? What if he answered? My heart pounded as I dialed the number. Every digit felt like a step off a cliff. It rang once, twice. Miller Bookstores, Anthony speaking. His voice was deeper now, polished by time and responsibility, but unmistakably his. After 45 years, I would have recognized that voice anywhere. I almost hung up, almost pressed the end call button, and drove away to find some other solution. But something in his tone, some warmth that seemed to travel through the phone and wrap around me like a blanket, made me speak. "Anthony, it is Emily. Emily Martin." Well, I am Emily Stone now, but used to be Martin. Silence. Long enough for me to think maybe the call had dropped, or maybe he had hung up, or maybe he had no idea who I was. Then, Emily. Just my name spoken like a prayer or a wonder, as if he could not believe it. "I'm so sorry to call like this." I rushed, the words stumbling in my desperation to explain before he could hang up. "I know it has been a long time and I probably should not be calling, but I did not know who else." "Where are you?" He interrupted me, his voice sharp with concern. "I am in Chicago." "Well, actually, I am in a parking lot in Chicago, and I know this sounds crazy, but my house was destroyed in the flood last week, and my daughter, she does not want me to stay with her, and I have nowhere to go." The words came out in a rush, each one harder to say than the last. Admitting your own daughter had rejected you was like admitting you had failed at the most fundamental part of being a human being. "Give me your location," Anthony said, his voice completely professional now. "I am coming to get you. You do not have to do that. I do not know why I called. I think I just needed to hear a friendly voice." "Emily," his tone cracked. "No argument. Tell me where you are. I'm already heading to my car." Through the phone, I could hear the sound of a door closing, an engine starting. He was really coming. This man I had not spoken to in 45 years was dropping whatever important business he was conducting to rescue me from a coffee shop parking lot. I gave him the address, my voice barely a whisper. "Anthony, I am not the girl you remember." "Neither am I," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. But I have been waiting 45 years for this call. After hanging up, I sat in that parking lot for almost 3 hours, alternating between panic and disbelief. What was I doing? What were we doing? This was insane. You could not just resume relationships after 4 decades as if you were continuing a conversation from yesterday. But as I watched the parking lot entrance waiting for a car I would not recognize carrying a man who might not recognize me, I felt something I had not felt since the flood alerts started sounding. Hope. Maybe it was foolish hope. Maybe it would lead to more disappointment, more pain, but it was hope nonetheless. And at 63, with nothing left to lose, hope was worth the risk. At 1:45 sharp, a silver Volvo pulled into the parking lot, moving slowly, as if the driver were looking for something or someone. I watched through my windshield as the car approached, my heart beating against my ribs like a bird trying to escape its cage. The windows were tinted so I could not see inside, but something deep in my chest told me it was him. The car stopped 2 spaces from mine and the driver's door opened. Even after 45 years, even with gray hair and lines around his eyes, even carrying the weight of decades I had not shared with him, I recognized him immediately. Anthony Miller stepped out of that car as if he were stepping out of my dreams. And when his eyes met mine through my windshield, the years collapsed between us as if they had never existed. Anthony walked toward my car with the same quiet confidence he had at 20. But now it was refined, polished by success and maturity. He wore dark jeans and a navy blazer that probably cost more than I used to spend on clothes in a year. But his eyes, those expressive brown eyes that had inhabited my dreams for decades, were exactly the same. I wanted to hide. I wanted to sink into my seat and pretend this was not happening. I looked terrible. I had not washed my hair properly in 3 days. My clothes were wrinkled from sleeping in them and smelled of despair and failure. But he was already at my car door, tapping gently on the window with a smile that made my heart flip like I was 17 again. I rolled down the window, suddenly unable to breathe. "Hi, Emily," he said softly. Up close, I could see the changes time had made. His dark hair was now silver at the temples, short and stylish. Lines marked the corners of his eyes and framed his mouth. He was broader in the shoulders, more solid, as if success had given him physical weight, along with everything else. But when he smiled at me through the car window, I saw the boy who used to take me to the lookout and tell me about his dreams. "Hi," I managed to say. My voice was barely a whisper. He studied my face for a long moment, those brown eyes absorbing every detail. I wanted to apologize for how I looked, for how far I had fallen, for calling him after all these years with nothing to offer but trouble. Instead, he said 3 words that changed everything. "You look beautiful." I started to cry. Right there in that coffee shop parking lot with Anthony Miller standing next to my borrowed car, I completely fell apart. 45 years of held-back tears, 3 days of sleeping poorly, a lifetime of being told I was not enough. Everything came out in deep sobs I could not control. He said nothing else. He did not try to silence me or tell me everything would be fine. He simply opened my car door, helped me out, and wrapped me in his arms as I came undone against his chest. He smelled of soft cologne and new books, of success and stability, of everything I had lost and everything I had never had. His blazer was soft against my cheek, and his arms were strong around my trembling shoulders. "I am so sorry," I gasped against his chest. "I am so sorry, Anthony. I should not have called. I should not have dragged you into this mess." "Shh," he murmured, his hand stroking my back. "You should have called years ago." When the tears finally stopped, I pulled away to look at him, ashamed of the wet spot I had left on his expensive blazer. I must look like a disaster. He reached out and wiped a tear from my cheek, his touch soft as a breeze. "You look like someone who has been through hell and survived. That is not a disaster, Emily. That is courage." I laughed, but it came out shaky and bitter. "Courage? I am 63 sleeping in a borrowed car because my own daughter does not want me. That is not courage. It is pathetic." His jaw tightened, and for a moment I saw a flash of the anger he was trying to hide. "Your daughter is wrong. You do not know her. I do not need to know her. I know you." He paused, his hand still resting gently on my shoulders. "Or at least I knew you? And the Emily Martin I knew would never turn her back on someone in need, especially not family." The way he said my maiden name as if it were something precious he had kept all these years made my chest ache with longing for the girl I used to be. "That was a long time ago," I said. "I am not that girl anymore." "Maybe not," he agreed. "But I would like to get to know the woman she became." He helped me take my belongings out of the car, the 3 bags, Robert's toolbox, my purse with its meager contents. If he was surprised by how little I had left, he did not show it. He carried everything to the back of his Volvo as if my flood-damaged clothes and broken memories were precious cargo. "Where are we going?" I asked as he opened the passenger door for me. Home, he said simply. The drive took about an hour, passing through increasingly elegant neighborhoods until we reached an area I had never seen before. Gentle hills dotted with estates, hidden behind stone walls and iron gates. Trees that looked like they had been growing there for decades. Mailboxes that probably cost more than most people's furniture. Anthony turned into a long driveway marked only by a small bronze plaque that read, Miller. The driveway curved through mature trees and well-manicured gardens before opening up to a circular driveway in front of a house that took my breath away. It was not ostentatious or flashy. It was elegant in the way true money is elegant. Discreet, secure, built to last. Stone and wood with tall windows that caught the afternoon light and a porch that invited you to sit and stay a while. Anthony, I sighed, looking at this monument to everything he had achieved. This is incredible. He parked the car but did not get out immediately. Instead, he sat looking at the house as if he were seeing it through my eyes. It is too big, he said quietly. It always has been. I built it thinking I would fill it one day, but... He shrugged. A gesture so familiar it made my heart ache. Some dreams do not work out the way you plan. Did you never marry? The question slipped out before I could stop it. He turned to look at me, his expression contemplative. I came close a couple of times, but something was always missing. You. He said it simply as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. The word floated between us in the silent car, charged with 45 years of what-ifs and could-have-beens. I wanted to ask him what he meant. I wanted to understand how I could have been absent from a life I was never part of. But before I could find the words, he was already getting out of the car, coming to open my door. The house was even more impressive inside. Hardwood floors that shone like honey, soaring ceilings, furniture that looked like it belonged in design magazines. But it did not feel cold or like a museum. There were books everywhere, shelves filling entire walls, comfortable reading chairs placed near windows, photographs scattered on side tables. It felt like a home where someone actually lived, not just a showcase of success. "Are you hungry?" Anthony asked, leading me to a kitchen that was bigger than my entire old living room. I was about to make lunch when you called. I realized I was starving. Yesterday's gas station sandwich felt like it had been a week ago, and my stomach was cramping with emptiness and nerves. "I do not want to be a bother," I began, but he cut me off with a look. "Emily, stop. You are not a bother. You are..." He paused, searching for words. "You are the answer to a question I have been asking myself for 45 years. While he cooked, and he really knew how to cook, moving around that huge kitchen with the ease of someone who had learned to fend for himself, I studied the photographs scattered around the room. Anthony at book launch events, cutting ribbons, talking to famous authors. Anthony with various women at charity galas and business functions, always smiling but never looking completely full. "Tell me about your life," he said, placing a plate of perfectly prepared risotto in front of me. "Tell me about Robert, about your daughter, about everything I missed." And I did. Over a lunch that tasted like paradise after days of gas station food, I told him about my marriage to Robert. Kind, reliable Robert, who had given me security and companionship, if not passion. About Sarah, the daughter I had wanted so desperately and loved so fiercely, who had grown up to be a stranger, who valued her boyfriend's comfort over her mother's needs. I told him about the years of being a good wife, a good mother, a good widow, about the flood that had taken everything I owned, and the daughter who had taken everything I had left. Anthony listened without interrupting, his brown eyes never leaving my face. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment. "I'm so sorry," he said finally. "I'm so sorry about Robert, about your house, about your daughter, but I am not sorry you called. Why?" The question came out smaller than I intended. He reached across the table and took my hand, still strong, still soft, still capable of making my heart race after all these years. "Because I never stopped thinking about you," he said quietly. Because every book I sold, every store I opened, every dream I fulfilled, it was all to be worthy of you when we met again. Anthony. I know it sounds crazy. I know 45 years is a long time and we are different people now, but when I heard your voice on the phone today, it was like the missing piece of my life finally clicked into place. I looked at our joined hands, his tanned and well cared for, mine marked by time, showing every day of my 63 years. I am not the girl you remember. No, he agreed. You are better. You are real. You have lived, loved, lost, and survived. That 18-year-old girl was beautiful, but she was just a promise. You are the woman that promise became. The words settled around my heart like a warm blanket, healing wounds I did not even know I was still carrying. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt seen, not as someone's mother or someone's wife or someone's burden, but as myself. What happens now? I asked. Anthony smiled, that same radiant smile that had made me fall in love with him when the world was young. Now we figure out what the rest of our lives look like, together if you will have me. Sitting in his beautiful kitchen full of good food and possibilities, I realized that sometimes the flood that destroys your old life is just clearing space for the life you were always meant to have. Living with Anthony was like discovering a version of myself I had forgotten existed. The first week was strange, tiptoeing around each other like polite strangers sharing a space. He gave me the entire guest wing of his house, a bedroom bigger than my old living room, a private bathroom with a tub that fit 2 people, and a small sitting room overlooking his gardens. I felt like I was staying at a luxury hotel, afraid to touch anything or leave too much evidence of my presence. But Anthony was patient in the way successful men learn to be, and slowly, I began to relax. He had a housekeeper, Clara, who came 3 days a week. But the other days, I found myself cooking for him. It started small, making coffee in the morning, preparing simple lunches. But Anthony appreciated everything with the enthusiasm of someone who had been eating restaurant meals and frozen dinners for decades. "This is wonderful," he said one night, savoring the pot roast I had made using my grandmother's recipe. "I have not had a home-cooked meal like this in years. It is nothing fancy," I protested. But inside, I was glowing. When was the last time anyone had appreciated my cooking? Sarah used to complain that I made the same 5 dishes over and over. Peter once suggested I try more modern recipes for family dinners. Anthony shook his head. "It is perfect. You are perfect." That word perfect should have made me uncomfortable. I was 63 with gray hair and lines around my eyes that had become permanent marks. My hands were stained by age, my body softer in places that used to be firm. I was anything but perfect. But when Anthony looked at me, I saw myself reflected in his eyes as someone beautiful, someone worthy of love and attention and kind care. We fell into routines that felt as natural as breathing. Breakfast together on the back porch where Anthony would review sales reports and I would watch the birds at his elaborate feeders. Afternoon walks on his estate where he showed me the gardens he had planted himself and the small greenhouse where he grew tropical plants as a hobby. Evenings were for talking. We had 45 years to catch up on, and we did it slowly, carefully, like archaeologists examining precious artifacts. I told him about the hard years after Robert died, when I had worked at a department store to pay the bills, about the loneliness of widowhood, the way people treat you like half a person when your husband is gone. He told me about his business, how it had grown from a small bookstore to a chain with branches in 3 states, about the women he had been involved with over the years, smart, successful women who looked perfect next to him at literary events, but never made him feel complete. "There was one woman," he said one night, as we sat by his fireplace, the rain beating against the windows. Marina was an editor, brilliant, passionate about literature. Everyone said we were perfect for each other. I felt a pang of jealousy that surprised me with its intensity. "What happened?" "I proposed to her," he said quietly, "on her birthday 6 years ago. A big production restaurant with ocean view, a family ring, everything she had said she wanted, and she said yes. We planned the wedding for the following year. But as the date approached, I kept getting the feeling that something was wrong. Not with her. She was everything anyone could want in a wife, if not with me. He paused, staring into the fire. The night before the wedding, I called it off. Anthony, no. What did you tell her? The truth. He looked at me, then his brown eyes serious, that I was still in love with a girl I had met 45 years ago, and that it would not be fair to marry her while my heart belonged to someone else. The words hit me like a physical punch. You canceled your wedding for me? For the memory of me. For the possibility that someday, somehow I might need you, and you would be here waiting. I stared at him, at this successful, beautiful man who could have had anyone, and tried to process what he was telling me. That is crazy, is it? He leaned forward, taking my hands in his. Is it crazier than the fact that you kept my business card in your wallet for 45 years? He was right. Sure, we were both crazy, both living with the ghosts of what could have been. But somehow, against all odds, our particular brand of madness had brought us back to each other. 2 weeks after my stay began, Sarah called. I was in Anthony's kitchen making dinner and humming to myself, literally humming something I had not done in years when my phone rang. Sarah's name on the screen made my stomach tighten with familiar anxiety. "Hello, honey," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Mom." Her tone was strange, carefully controlled. "I have been trying to reach you. Your phone keeps going straight to voicemail." That was true. I was screening my calls. I was not ready to deal with the guilt or obligation Sarah might heap on me. "I have been busy." "Busy doing what?" "Mrs. Linda said you moved days ago. Where are you living?" I looked around Anthony's beautiful kitchen, at the fresh flowers he had brought home that morning, at the fine wine decanting on the counter. "I am staying with a friend." "What friend, Mom?" "You do not have friends with houses like that?" Her assumption hurt in part because it had been true for so long after Robert died. I had let most of my friendships fade, too tired and too proud to maintain relationships when I had nothing to offer in return. "You would be surprised," I said coldly. There was a pause, and I could practically hear her processing the information. "Mom, I think we need to talk. Peter and I have been discussing the situation, and we think maybe we were too hasty. Maybe you could stay in our guest room for a while, just until you get back on your feet." The offer that would have meant everything to me a month ago now felt hollow, even insulting. "What made you change your mind?" We realized that maybe we were too focused on our own needs. Family should stick together. What she meant, I realized, was that she had probably heard through the neighborhood gossip network that her mother was no longer sleeping in a car. Someone had mentioned seeing her with a distinguished man in a luxury car. Sarah was curious, and curiosity had made her generous. "That is very kind of you," I said, "but I am perfectly happy where I am. Mom, you cannot just move into a stranger's house. It is not safe. What do you know about this person?" "I know he never made me feel like a burden," I said quietly. "I know he values my company and appreciates my cooking and tells me I am beautiful every day." The silence that followed was so long I thought she might have hung up. "Is this some kind of relationship?" Sarah asked. Finally, her voice tight with something I could not identify. "Disapproval? Shame?" "I do not think that is any of your business," I said, surprising myself with my bluntness. "Of course it is my business. You are my mother. I am worried you are being manipulated." "Like you manipulated me?" The words came out before I could stop them, sharp and bitter. "Mom, that is not fair." "Is it not? You rejected me when I needed help the most. You chose your boyfriend's comfort over your mother's safety. And now that you think I might have found happiness somewhere else, suddenly you care about my well-being." I could hear Peter's voice in the background, but I could not make out the words. "Look," Sarah said, her tone shifting to the reasonable, patient voice she used when she thought I was being difficult. "Why do you not bring your friend over for dinner on Sunday? We would like to meet him. No, Sarah, you do not get to approve or disapprove of my choices anymore. You gave up that right when you kicked me out. We did not kick you out. We just thought... You thought of yourselves exactly as you are doing now. I took a deep breath, feeling stronger than I had felt in years. I am happy, Sarah. Truly happy for the first time in longer than I can remember. If you want to be part of my life, you are welcome to try, but you no longer have the right to dictate the terms. I hung up before she could respond, my hands shaking slightly with the adrenaline of finally saying what I should have said weeks ago. Anthony found me a few minutes later standing at the kitchen window and looking at his gardens without really seeing them. "Everything okay?" he asked, wrapping me in his arms from behind. I leaned back against his chest, letting his warmth take away the chill of dealing with Sarah. "My daughter called. She wants to meet you?" "Good," Anthony said, pressing a kiss to the top of my head. "I look forward to meeting her." I turned in his arms, studying his face. "Are you not worried about what she will think? What she will say?" Anthony smiled, that reassuring smile that had made me fall in love with him the first time. "Emily, I waited 45 years for you to come home to me. I am not going to let anyone, not even your daughter, make you doubt that you belong here." As I stood in his arms in that beautiful kitchen, I realized he was right. I belonged here. Not because of his money or his beautiful house or his success, but because of the way he looked at me, like I was the answer to every prayer he had whispered. For the first time since the flood, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The wedding was nothing like the first one. When I married Robert 43 years ago, it was all about what others expected. White dress church ceremony, banquet hall reception with a DJ and a buffet. We invited everyone we knew and several people we did not particularly like because that is what was done. You performed the ritual for the community, not for yourself. This time, Anthony and I did exactly what we wanted. The ceremony took place in his back garden on a sunny March afternoon, 5 months after that call in the coffee shop parking lot. The justice of the peace was an old friend of Anthony's, and the only witnesses were Clara, the housekeeper, and Michael, Anthony's partner and best friend for 20 years. I wore a simple green dress that Anthony said matched my eyes, and he wore a gray suit that made him look distinguished and elegant. No extravagance, no fanfare, no stress about impressing anyone. Just two people who had found each other again after almost half a century, promising to spend the rest of their lives together. Sarah came to the wedding. I had debated whether to even invite her, but Anthony convinced me to try one more time. "She is your daughter," he said simply. "You will regret it if you do not give her the chance to do the right thing." So I called her 2 weeks before the ceremony. "Anthony and I are getting married," I said without preamble. "March 15th at 2 p.m. You are welcome to come, but Peter is not invited." She showed up alone, looking uncomfortable in a dress that probably cost more than my monthly budget used to be. She shook hands with Anthony, politely made appropriate conversation, and even managed to smile when the judge declared us husband and wife. But I could see the reserve in her eyes the way she evaluated Anthony's house, his car, the obvious signs of wealth. This was not about supporting her mother's happiness. It was about positioning herself for what might come next. This morning, I woke up in Anthony's arms, in my husband's arms, in the room that has become ours, in the house that has become a home. The sunlight streamed through the windows, overlooking the gardens we have cultivated together, and I could smell the coffee Anthony makes every morning before I wake up. At 63, I am happier than I have ever been, not because of Anthony's money or his beautiful house or his success, but because someone sees me, really sees me, and chooses to love what he sees. The flood took my old life, shattered it, and scattered the fragments. But sometimes I think as I watch Anthony reading his newspaper across the breakfast table, destruction is just another word for a new beginning. Sometimes you have to lose everything you thought you wanted to find everything you really needed. And sometimes, if you are very lucky, first love gets a second chance to become forever love. The business card I carried for 45 years is now framed above Anthony's desk in his office, a reminder that some promises are worth keeping even when it takes almost half a century to do so. Now, if you like this story, click on this next video appearing on the screen because in it, the story of betrayal and twist that you have never seen before.